Hey everybody, and welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And again, here, this is an older interview I did in April of 2018 with Dr. Joseph Burkes, or Joseph Burkes, MD. Um, I wanted to bring it here to this channel. It was on UFO News Network Sundays originally, UFONN, UFO News Network, when I was there on that channel and podcast. Again, I think it's a very relevant conversation, and I like to bring my talks over with Dr. Joseph Burkes on to engage in the phenomenon. If you haven't seen them, there have been 4 talks I've done with Dr. Joseph Burkes on engaging the phenomenon, so go check those out. There will be more coming. I have another talk scheduled with him, at least one, if not more. And I've known Dr. Joseph Burkes for quite a while at this point. I think we first started talking in maybe 2011, 2012, and I actually first met him in person around maybe 2014 or 2015, and I have met him afterwards and everything. So again, Dr. Joseph Burkes, incredibly important as far as the contact network, the contact underground, and beginning in the early 90s. You'll hear it all here as he explains it. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
And good morning from Philadelphia. Frank here.
James coming here from Westchester, New York.
And Dr. Joseph Burkes from Eureka, California.
So today we have on, today we have on Dr. Joseph Burkes. And I'm hoping to introduce Dr. Burkes to a lot of people in the UFO community, because Dr. Burkes has done some amazing work, especially regarding contactees and theories that are involved in the contact experience. Dr. Burkes obviously is a doctor, but he also has a very interesting background in the peace and social justice movements. Dr. Burkes, do you want to just give yourself a solid intro and discuss some of your background in both the beginning of how you got into contact and the contact work and the contact movement, and your work in the peace and social justice movements?
Or First of all, I'd like to thank Frank and James for inviting me on UFO Network News, or the News Network, I should say, perhaps, UFONN. It's a special pleasure for me because this is a radio show that's done by contact activists and in support of a vast network of people who are willfully going out and engaging UFO intelligence in the course of field work and other kinds of activities. And so about myself, I was born and raised in Manhattan in the 50s and 60s. I was active in various peace and social justice movements. Way back in the early 1960s, the United States and Russia were doing nuclear testing, and I, as a little boy, like tens of millions of children all over the planet, were having exposures to radioactive materials that were from the testing of enormous hydrogen bombs. So even at an early age, because of the social activism in my family, I was on the street saying, "Ban the bomb," and end to atmospheric testing, which was a successful struggle led primarily by women. And in 1962 and 63, it was negotiated a nuclear test ban. stopping the testing of hydrogen bombs in the atmosphere and reducing the risk of radioactive contamination to millions of children who are getting exposed to the radioactivity through the milk in the food cycle. So I was also active in the Physicians Anti-Nuclear Movement, our American affiliate of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. That was the name of our organization. The American affiliate was the Physicians for Social Responsibility, PSR. And I was active in a campaign alerting the public about the dangers of nuclear arms race and unsafe nuclear technologies in the civilian sector as well. So we, as part of that international movement, we were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for this international movement of doctors on both sides of the Iron Curtain, in the former Eastern Soviet bloc and now also in the West. We were informing the public about the dangers of nuclear war and meeting and with government officials to alert them that there was no cure for nuclear war. There was only prevention, and we must prevent what we cannot cure. So it was a social medicine program made large. We called ourselves citizen diplomats, and we went to the former Soviet Union. I was there several times in peace missions, meeting with the Soviet doctors. And so when I heard about Dr. Stephen Greer in 1992 at UFO Expo West, where I attended my first UFO meeting, I saw this tall, bearded doctor who shared the same vocation as I. We both were working ER at the time, emergency room. And he said he had a citizens diplomatic initiative not to the Russians to prevent nuclear war, but to the intelligence behind the UFO phenomena, which he called extraterrestrial. And I signed up and attended one of the workshops he gave, and I saw my first UFO, which was very exciting. And I was reading on the subject for a year. I was hooked. I was excited. And I was designated, I should say, the working group coordinator for the Los Angeles CE-5, that's Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, human-initiated, human-empowered contact with what we believe were extraterrestrials. So that's, in a nutshell, the story of my involvement. I could go into more detail about the civil rights movement, the desegregation demonstrations and boycotts and all other activities I did in the 60s. I also worked with trade unionists to make the workplace a better place by working on the issue of occupational health and safety. So I have a long history of peace and social justice movement activities, like trade unions, peace, civil rights, environment, and anti-nuclear. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, summing up about 30 years of contact activism. I should say 40 years of political activism and 25 years of contact activism.
So, Dr. Joe, why don't we get into the beginning years of CSETI and when you were involved in the field work and your own working group, and also your, upon doing that, your discovery of prime contactees and their role in the contact movement.
Right. First of all, I'd like to say that, having been part of what I would call fully developed social movements, I'm talking about the civil rights movement, where millions of people are involved, the anti-Vietnam War movement that mobilized the whole country, every part, to demonstrate and protest the war. That was a social movement. What I think we have now is something that's, you might call a proto-movement, sort of like, for people who remember their biology in high school, protoplasm is what exists in the cell separate from the nucleus, and it allows the existence of life. Well, the word proto, or prefix, something that is developing. It has the potential. So we are not a social movement. At this point, contact activists form a network, and we're in what I imagine is the consciousness raising phase. When sufficient numbers of people who are having contact experiences and then willfully going out and engaging the phenomena, when this becomes a worldwide movement that is organized both at the grassroots and with national and international organizations, that would be a true social movement. So I think we're a network now of contact activists. In terms of the early days, what can I say except it was a very exciting endeavor, along with helping my wife raise children back in the 90s. They were still growing up, teenagers. And alongside my work as a physician, I'm an internal medicine physician, but I also worked many years in the ER, emergency room. Along with those two activities, being in the contact network was one of the three most exciting endeavors of my life, because we were actually going out into the field, following a protocol that was designed by Dr. Stephen Greer and his assistant, Sherry Adamek. And we were using a protocol, thought projection, and other techniques to interact with the intelligence behind the phenomena, because they would actually show up for us when we were in the field. And we would have limited interactions, sometimes signaling with lights. There's also telepathic communication. And I was doing this work for about a year when, in the emergency room, a young EKG tech who emigrated from the former Soviet Union, I'm going to call him Misha, that's not his real name, it's a pseudonym, and a young EKG tech who had been working for about a year told me who he was. He said that he was a high-level contactee. He had had many sightings and what he remembered as an onboard experience as well. And he was interested in joining our contact team. And I asked him what was his interest, how he got involved. And he said that before he had emigrated to the United States back, and we're going back now, 1991, 92. Before he had emigrated, he had had a very vivid dream in which he saw himself traveling to the United States, getting a job in a healthcare setting, working with a tall, bearded Jewish doctor who was working in the emergency room and with whom he would do contact work. And he told me that when he came to the emergency room a year before he revealed who he was, and he was just working there as an EKG tech, he also was studying to become an RN, registered nurse. He saw me in the ER, and I was the man of the dream, which was kind of, well, it's quite an impressive story, if true. And I should say that as a medical student, a pre-medical student, young Dr. Burkes, I'd always wanted to be the man of the dreams of perhaps a beautiful nurse, or this is before I got married, co-ed, when I was an undergraduate. And I didn't expect to be the man of the dreams of a Russian contactee who was working in my emergency room. So there was a sort of irony there. So I asked Misha, I said, well, why did you wait a year? You'd been working here for a year. And before you revealed who you were, I was going out in the field, developing my confidence as a team leader, and having certain exciting experiences in terms of field work. But why did he wait a year? And he said, because you weren't ready yet. And that was sort of a chilling statement, because it immediately alerted to me the possibility that he, as many other high-level contactees are, were in direct telepathic communication with the intelligence behind the phenomena. And I realized his importance when we went out into the field for the first time together, and 6 other investigators, in October of 1993. And I had my first telepathic override, in which I was alerted via communication that's extrasensory perception, that a UFO was going to show up for our team out in the desert. I had been meditating. I got what was called a contact download. And it told me 2 a.m., one craft coming in from the northwest. And sure enough, just as scheduled or predicted, a UFO showed up at 2 a.m., a Joshua tree in the northwest, black orb, I should say a red glowing orb, and it was moving at a tremendous speed, no sound whatsoever. So I realized that there are people who are out there forming contact teams or participating in contact teams who are very high-level contactees. Dr. Stephen Greer is another example. And so the concept of prime contactee came to me when I realized there were certain features that they shared in common. One of which was the people who are designated as prime contactees, people who believe that they're in contact or communication with extraterrestrial intelligence, the presumed MO of the intelligence behind the UFO phenomena. That these people, contactees, prime contactees, are recruited by flying saucer intelligence at a relatively early age with no apparent adult supervision. They engage in meditation at a young age, either as a teenager or a young adult, become very adept at meditation, which facilitates telepathic communication, in my opinion. And they would also have the capacity to request UFO sightings, and UFOs would appear. And it's very important to note that this would happen in the presence of others, demonstrating to other people that they had this special relationship with UFO intelligence. And the prime contactees form groups, and they are full of, shall we say, idealistic messages of wanting to reach out to the extraterrestrials on the basis of peace and cooperation and solidarity. And so that was how, by meeting people like Misha and then Dr. Greer, who founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and initiated the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, in which I became a working coordinator for. These individuals play a very important role, but they're part of a spectrum of people who are in contact and communication. Although they have special skills that they've been brought along with by their contact with the alleged ETs, they're providing leadership, but all contact experiencers who are joining our network have a very important role to play. And the sense of mission for peace and cooperation and solidarity is something that we all in the network share. And it's an international movement. Oh, I use the word movement, I should, an international effort. I met people in Brahma, that's the Peruvian contact network that was established in 1974. And so I was able to meet with people from all over the world via my work with CSETI, as well as Rama, the Mission Rama, the Peruvian contactees that were established around the leadership of Sixto Paz Wells, a young student in Lima, Peru, as well as many of his other activist supporters. So I did describe briefly what the prime contactees are, but there's much more to share in terms of the initial activities of our working group that allowed me to learn a tremendous amount about the phenomena.
Also, you know, in your all this work in the field and doing the contact work with CSETI and some of the Rama members, you also came up with some interesting theories. One was the virtual reality hypothesis, the experience where the UFO intelligence, or presumably extraterrestrials, could create almost a simulation that was almost like a virtual reality experience.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
We can get into that and then get maybe more into the fieldwork investigations later. You're going right to the heart of the matter, James. I just want to say you're not pulling any punches. You're asking me to explain on the radio some challenging concepts that have come to me through 25 years of contact work. So often when I talk on radio and give public addresses, I share a lot of autobiographical material. This is a different type of situation because I'm talking to contact activists. You and Frank know quite a bit about the field. And I do very much appreciate you giving me the opportunity to get right into some of these what I imagine are advanced concepts. Well, I should say that with Misha, now part of our team in 1993, the level of contact that we experienced went way up. The prime contactees, when they're in close communication with UFO intelligence, when you go out in the field with them, Dr. Greer in the early days, maybe less so in subsequent years, but in the early days, Dr. Greer was a focus of attention of the UFO phenomena. Practically wherever he went, UFOs showed up. I mean, in his neighborhood, in Asheville, North Carolina, when he was traveling to West Palm Beach, where I saw my first UFO in one of his workshops in June of 1992. He traveled around the country giving lectures. UFOs would show up. And so it's not only the protocols that the contactees are following that brings in the phenomena for interaction. It's also very much the people that you're with. And if you're with a group of experiencers who have had a long history of involvement with the phenomena, or with a prime contactee who has a direct telepathic communication, in my judgment, with the phenomena, you are very likely to have a sighting. And that's what we had when we went out in the field with Misha. Practically every single time, golden globes, red orbs. We even had a couple of sightings of what looked like discs. All these things are more likely to occur if your team is united in terms of a sense of cohesion personally, in terms of the goal of this mission for peace and international solidarity, but also with the people who have had ongoing interactions. So I used to make a joke about the contact network. You know, they say in Hollywood, if you want to get ahead, it's not what you know in terms of being an artist or director, it's who you know in terms of the Hollywood hierarchy. And so the same applies in some ways to the contact network. You can read about the phenomena for years, you can meditate, and you can have the desire for sightings, but having a high-level contactee or being in a group where multiple experiencers are increases the probability you're going to have sightings and other interactions. So in 1993, I had with me Misha Goldman, I'll call him, and we worked together, and there were many other people in our medical center who were part of the team. And we were doing field work intensively. I'm talking about going out initially for the first year, at least once a week, and then in the subsequent years, perhaps less often, once or twice, once or every 2 months. We used Joshua Tree. It was then a national monument. It subsequently became a national park. We used Joshua Tree, which is the high desert outside of Los Angeles, San Bernardino area. It's a 4,000-foot elevation. It's a pristine high desert park where you're able to hike into the backcountry. And this is one of the conditions of doing contact work. It's true that UFOs show up over cities, also over military bases and nuclear power plants, and also many contact experiences happen, not in cities, but in more remote locations, people driving and having missing time or hiking out in the wilderness. So one of the conditions for having contact in this group process, fieldwork situation, is to go to remote locations. And we found ourselves looking for remote locations. Southern California, that can be a challenge because there's so many people. We're talking about 20 million people living in Southern California. But we did find a relatively secluded area in the Joshua National Park, and then we'd hike into the backcountry, which is quite an endeavor, especially during the rainy season, where flash floods occur in the high desert and those sort of things. So we had been doing contact together for a year. And in 1994, it was just this time, Misha and myself, and we didn't have the rest of the team with us. And it was, we were at the base of the Queen Mountain, which is a spectacular mountain in Joshua Tree National Park now. And it goes up about 5,500 feet, and we were at the base at about 4,000 foot elevation in a pristine valley. And to the south was a hill that rose about 600 feet. It's called Negri Hill. And I had noted that the previous month, this is October of 1994, when I was with a team of 7 out there, I noticed some very anomalous anomalous shooting stars. Now, shooting stars are pieces of space junk, rocks, ice, that enter the atmosphere and become meteors. If they land, they're called a meteorite. And they produce a fleeting visual display. And I noticed that in October of 1994, every time I turned to look at a different section of the sky, which is what you do during field work, you look in one section of the sky for a few minutes and then turn to another. Every time I turned to look at a different section of the sky, I saw a shooting star. It was as if there was a connection between me and the shooting stars, which sounded really crazy. It happened 5 times in a row. And I turned to my coworker, Misha, and I said, did you have this experience ever when you're looking at sky and during field work and you look to a different section of the sky and as soon as you turn your head, a shooting star occurs? He said, yes. I said, I had it 5 times in a row. And he said, you want to know how many times I've just had it right here in the field? I said, what, how many times? He said, 25 times in a row. So I realized there was a consciousness link between our field investigators and an intelligence that was able to create a simulation of shooting stars. This became apparent the following month, this time when there was just the 2 of us out there, November of 1994. And we were in this pristine valley, I call it the Little Queen Valley, operating at 4,000 feet. It was cold. It's a high desert, down into the 50s, 40s, even the high 30s. And we were in this secluded little valley. It took us about an hour to hike up from the wilderness parking lot where we left our vehicle. And I was looking in the direction of Negri Hill, this 600-foot prominence to the south, facing the Queen Mountain in the north. And I heard Misha say, oh, there's another one. And he was looking to the south towards Negri Hill. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, there's a shooting star. And I looked and I saw nothing. Now, my vision was pretty good back then. I now wear glasses. I didn't require glasses back in 1994. And I had been doing field work for a year with the CE-5 Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And I couldn't explain why I could not see what Misha was seeing, these shooting stars. And I said to him, were these shooting stars the same or similar? He said, yes. I said, were they in the same place? Yes. Were they had the same length of trail? Absolutely. Same angle, if you extend the angle of the shooting star down towards the horizon, the same angle of approach, exactly the same. He had seen 3 in a row. I was looking at the same section of the sky. I had seen nothing. And the ones he had seen were stereotypic, exactly the same, as if there was a projector or a video clip that was being repeated. So I said, okay, ask them to show me what you've just seen. And Misha said, show Dr. Burkes. And immediately I saw a faint shooting star appear in the exact location where Misha had indicated 3 others had appeared. Well, this was pretty remarkable. There was evidence suggesting a telepathic link with an anomalous visual display that appeared to be a shooting star. So I said to Misha, okay, well, that's good. Ask them to show me again. And he says, show Joe. And to my surprise and my delight, there it was, in the same section of the sky above Negri Hill, a faint trail of a meteor, a shooting star. It was exactly like the other one that I had seen. Same length of trail, same angle, same brightness, same color. The duration of the sighting was, fleeting, a few seconds at most. Now my heart starts to beat because I'm realizing this is important. The intelligence behind the phenomenon is indicating to us that not only do they have telepathic communication, but they can link our thoughts and requests to an anomalous visual display that we call shooting stars. But clearly something else is going on. This is not a natural phenomenon. So my heart is beating because I'm excited. This is show and tell, and I'm getting quite a show. And I say to Misha, we have this thing called coincidence. And I thank you very much, whoever you guys are out there showing me this. 2 is very good, 2 in a row. And of course, for Misha, it was 5 times in a row. I said, but, people are going to say Dr. Burkes is a competent physician, he's in the emergency room, he's got a responsible job, but he's not an astronomer, he's not a professional scientist, amateur, and he probably doesn't know, he's just mistaken. So 2 in a row is very good, but could you show me one more time? And there was a pause. It was what you might call a pregnant pause, full of meaning. Because the other 2 sightings were immediate. After request show, Dr. Burkes show, Joe, in a fraction of a second, they appeared. It was just immediate. But this time there was a pause, like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, as if to say, don't you know we're doing this? And again, the manifestation of a visual display, a shooting star that was exactly like the 2 others. Well, this is quite remarkable. And you could say that the UFO intelligence was able to create a visual display by shooting a piece of space dust or a rock or a piece of ice from a spacecraft. But how could they do it 3 times for me and 6 times for Misha, to have it appear in the exact same location? It would be quite an achievement to do that coordination if they were way out in space. The fact that Misha was able to see it and I could not suggested to me that there was some kind of illusion going on. And this is a very powerful piece of information, because in the UFO literature we have countless descriptions of people doing field work or looking at the sky, and one person is seeing, quite a bit, but the other people, or maybe 2 people, but others are not. And so what the intelligence behind the phenomena was showing us was that it could be a visual display that appears for one person only, or a small group, and then others not. This is very important, because if UFO intelligence can do this with shooting stars, or what we call shooting stars, they're using some kind of holographic technology, then all the sightings that have been documented for the last 70 years of the modern UFO era, if not all, then some at least, could be holographic-like technology. That's a very powerful concept, because it helps explain a lot of the inconsistencies in the UFO literature, and gives us an insight into the incredible psi technology that this intelligence behind the phenomenon is creating. So on the basis of this experience and other experiences, which I can go into, or UFO intel, that's what I like to call these so-called ETs, UFO intelligence, UFO intel. They in later contacts, they showed me how they can do holographic-like visual displays that are illusions, not only with anomalous shooting stars, but also with visual projections, which are of what appear to be extraterrestrials. So a lot of the people's contacts are holographic. These are staged events. The extraterrestrials are, or whatever the source of the intelligence behind the phenomenon, is able to use this powerful tool to create illusion. So out of it, I designed a theory called the virtual experience hypothesis, which we can get into more detail later on in the course of our discussion.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, because in the literature, and of course many people that have had UFO experiences, there's always the high strangeness, and there's accounts of people hearing voices, like almost like the audible aspect of telepathy, not the knowingness aspect, which is similar but slightly different. But you don't hear much about, or as much about, the visuals being implanted, as far as what they're seeing being somewhat illusory, other than people will report they see different images and things, but they not so much of what they're seeing in the field could be a projection of some sort that is implanted. But yeah, why don't you go into some of the field work experiences that led you through?
The first, as I mentioned, in 1992, I was recruited by Dr. Stephen Greer to be a team leader. I trained in meditation, and I had been somewhat familiar with ESP as a college student. It was popular when I was in medical school in Boston, a program called Silva Mind Control. So as a first-year medical student, I did take a rudimentary course in meditation or Silva Mind Control technique. And I learned about how one could use rudimentary sight ability or techniques to do simple things like find a parking space. I know it sounds funny, but I would be able to go into a quiet place when I'm looking for a parking space. And at the level of knowledge, I would kind of know where the parking space was, and I'd find it. And this was quite delightful. Didn't work all the time, but certainly enough. And living in Boston, going to medical school there, I got to a lot of traffic and a lot of cars, so I was able to use it. So I was somewhat familiar with meditation, but I wasn't a regular practitioner. And as a result of my contact with the network and going out and doing field work, I was advised to take a course in meditation. So I took a course in TM. In fact, my whole family, well, except my younger daughter, was only about 10 years old at the time. But my son was 15, and my wife and I, we all took this course in transcendental meditation and started meditating on a regular basis, which is what we did both in the field, but also as part of the discipline of being in a contact team. We would practice regular meditation to facilitate communication. So with the intelligence behind the phenomena. So we were a group of meditators, and I realized that something important was going on because as part of this effort of going out to reach out to the extraterrestrials, we also had some changes personally. One of the things I experienced was I lost my taste for meat. I had never seriously considered vegetarianism. I had always been a meat and potatoes guy, lamb chops, steak, hamburgers, you name it. I would anything.
At Embassy Suites by Hilton, we've got room for all your bags and your baggage. And so overpackers,
when I started doing the meditation, I realized I don't want to eat meat anymore. And my wife, fortunately, is an excellent cook, and she was able to prepare vegetarian meals. She wanted to go into vegetarian diet as well. So there was that personal transformation. I also had been suffering from some low back issues from years of sitting, 10, 12 hours a day working in a hospital. And so I had a bit of a spare tire in my early 40s and was, 10, 15 pounds overweight, and that didn't help my back issues. Now all of a sudden I'm meditating, eating a vegetarian diet, going out to remote locations to find potential field work sites. I'm hiking, which is something I hadn't done for about 20 years. And I lost some weight, and my back pain got much better. And so there were personal changes that happened that were beneficial as a result of doing the contact work. So we started in September of 1992. We chose a field work site in the Santa Susana Pass. This is in Chatsworth, in a suburb of Los Angeles, in the northwest corner of the Los Angeles County. And we chose this field site, which happened by chance or perhaps by design, which is another story, right near the Department of Energy site. The Santa Susana Pass connects the Simi Valley, another bedroom community, with Chatsworth. And it's a high desert locale. We found a spot that had a spectacular view of the Santa Monica Mountains to the south, and we could see the entire San Fernando Valley. It was an excellent place to do field work behind a locked gate, a place that subsequently became a county park. And this is the place where Dr. Greer did his demonstration field work in August of 1992 that trained our team. And even when Dr. Greer was doing the demonstration field work, we had sightings of Golden Globe, and there were other anomalous events that occurred. But without Dr. Greer, I was uncertain whether we would have success. I was gratified to discover that as soon as we were going out into the field, we would see, in the course of field work, Golden Globes and red orbs that appeared at a research site. And to the north of the Santa Susana Pass is a place called Rocky Peak State Park. It's a wilderness state park, and it has the highest, one of the highest mountains in the Santa Monica. Well, actually, it's the Little San Bernardino Range. And it's a peak that goes up about 2,900, 3,000 feet, something like that. And the park is around it. Well, we were looking to the north, and while we're doing our field work, we saw these red orbs that were going up and down, and they were silent, and they were just kind of playing like peekaboo. They'd go up, halfway up the sky, then they'd slowly come down, and then another one would go up, and then come down behind the ridge line to the north. So there were anomalous events that were occurring. One of the first field investigations we did was quite dramatic, in that while we were doing our meditation, there was atmospheric effects that were highly anomalous. There was no storm in the vicinity, and yet while our eyes were closed and we were meditating, repeatedly there were what you might call silent lightning strikes, because all of a sudden, even with our eyes closed, everything went white. There was brilliant burst of light, but no lightning and no thunderstorm activity. And this happened repeatedly. People who had their eyes open during the meditation saw that it was turned night into day. For a fraction of a second, everything around us was illuminated. And this happened repeatedly. As we were getting ready to break up field work, we would try to leave this place together in groups of twos, because it is a rocky terrain. And back in the early days of the contact network, we were uncertain as to how much contact we would achieve. We knew that despite our meditation and our preparation spiritually for going out and trying to engage the UFO phenomena, that it was very strange. And if the UFOs show up, some people would be frightened. And so as part of the protocols back then, we would have what we call a safe area. And this was a very good consideration, because when Dr. Stephen Greer started doing field investigations repeatedly, when UFOs would show up, people in the group who weren't prepared mentally would become panic-stricken and actually flee the site. This happened in Gulf Breeze in 1992, where we had an incredible sighting outside of the Panhandle. It's Gulf Breeze is near Pensacola, Florida. And during that incredible UFO investigation, which was videotaped, showing the appearance of 3 typical Gulf Breeze UFOs that formed a triangle in response to Dr. Stephen Greer's work. Some people became panic-stricken when Dr. Greer announced we're going to carry out emergency protocols for landing and boarding, because these 3 UFOs over the Gulf were coming in response to Dr. Greer's field investigation. And people in the group, there were 40 of them there on the beach in Navarre Beach. Some of the people became so frightened at the prospect that the UFOs were coming towards them and might even land, that they got into their cars and fled. So having a safe area was a concept that we developed that in case people did get very emotional and upset and frightened by whatever they're experiencing, they could go to this area with a buddy. And we had a buddy system. Everyone would have a person that would escort them. And it's a good idea. If you are working out in places that are high up, rocky, people can fall, it's good to have a buddy to know where you are at all times. So we had a safe area designated on the trail that led back to the, when we were doing field work in the Santa Susana Pass, we had a safe area that we would go to if a person, one of us became overwhelmed. So one of my coworkers, and this is another exciting story, how the team formed with amazing synchronicities. One of my coworkers in the hospital, Shirley Jones, who was a respiratory therapist and worked in our ER. She had a shift during, the next morning after field work, she had a shift in the hospital. So she had to leave somewhat early. She left about a half an hour before the main group started heading down the trail. So she got into her van and drove away at the time that we were just going down the trail. And we got to the area where our safe zone was. And we saw an amazing light on the ridgeline that was flashing at us. There was actually two lights. One was directed at us, and it had a flash like strobe. It was quite large. It was on a remote part of the ridgeline where there were no houses. It was in Rocky Peak State Park. There were no trails, we subsequently found out, to that isolated place on the ridgeline. And there were these two powerful lights that were probably 2 or 3 feet across. One was signaling at us. The other one was shining to the southwest. And one of the people on the team, who I'll call Mark, who was a film writer, he was a screenwriter, he was very helpful. Mark had, like many of the people on our team, was highly educated. He had an undergraduate degree, Mark, from Harvard, where he was an editor of the Harvard Lampoon. He was also had 2 master's degrees, one in film writing and the other in psychology. And he was very knowledgeable in contact protocols because he was an experienced meditator. And he suggested to me that I should signal at the light on the ridgeline and use a very specific set of signals. When I tried first just randomly firing our lights at the anomalous light that was on the ridgeline, I didn't get very much success. However, when I followed Mark's suggestion, which was, and by the way, we used back in those days these 500,000 candle power signal lanterns that were called by the mail order house the light bazooka. So we had these big lights that had a lead battery hooked in. They weighed about 15 pounds. And I used the light bazooka to signal at the anomalous light on the ridgeline. It always struck me as kind of funny that we were there for peace and solidarity, and we were signaling at them with, this light that had the name of a military weapon. In any case, I fired my light bazooka at the anomalous light, and nothing initially happened. But then when I followed the instructions that my friend Mark gave me, he said, "Why don't you do this? Shine your light and wait 3 seconds. Then fire your light twice and wait 3 seconds. And then fire your light 3 times." So it turned out I flashed the light, and then I paused 3 seconds, flash, pause 3 seconds, 3 flashes. I did that once. The second time, the intelligence behind the phenomena did something incredible. As soon as I fired the light bazooka for the first signal, I got an immediate strobe reply. I waited 3 seconds, flash, and immediately flash, flash, and return. But it was a very rapid, bright flash. It was quite remarkable. And I waited another 3 seconds, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, flash, 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 3, and immediately 3 flashes back in response. So it was as if there was an electronic connection between my finger on the trigger of the light bazooka and the intelligence behind the phenomena that anticipated what I was going to do, because immediately, a fraction of a second. Now and our light bazookas, they weren't very sophisticated. You'd fire the light, it was very bright, but it would take about a second for the light to fade out. But these lights on the ridgeline were very sophisticated. They could have continuous signaling, or I should say a continuous light. They could have strobes. They could even fade in and fade out over 5 or 10 seconds. So these were very sophisticated lights. They were large, and they could interact with us. Well, to me, that was, although it wasn't a UFO, it was a very dramatic encounter, because it suggested to me during the first week of our field investigations in 1992 that there was a telepathic component. It was as if I was linked mentally or electronically to the light that was about 1,000 or 2,000 feet away above us on the ridge line in the Santa Susana Pass. So that was one of the first field investigations that alerted me to this. Now, my coworker, Shirley Jones, who had left early, she was driving an old Astro van. It was a Chevy sports utility vehicle. It was basically a truck. She was driving, and ahead of us, she got down to her car, and she was going to the southeast from the Santa Susana Pass. And all of a sudden, as she's driving away, her car starts shaking violently. And we had both spent some time in New York together. I was born and raised in Manhattan. I think Shirley lived there for many years. And she said to me, my car was shaking like driving down, New York City streets that were so poorly maintained that your car was violently shaking a lot of the time when you were driving back then in the 60s and 70s. And so she said, when she said it was like driving down a New York street where there are a lot of potholes, I knew exactly what she meant. Her car was shaking violently. She thought maybe she had a blowout. This is 2 o'clock in the morning. She's a single woman driving home alone. And she stopped the car because she thought maybe she had a blowout. She thought maybe she had gone over some railroad tracks. She carefully exited the vehicle, looked around, and there were no evidence of a flat. There were no railroad tracks that she had gone over. There were no potholes. And as she looked up towards the Santa Susana Pass, she saw a light signaling at her. And I mentioned there were 2 lights. One was signaling at us. The other one was directed towards the southeast, which was the direction that Shirley had gone. And that violent shaking of the car seemed to be more than coincidence. It was as if the intelligence behind the phenomena wanted her to stop the vehicle so that she could see the light as well. It was, quite interesting how the intelligence behind the phenomena was showing us their tremendous capability, not only to interact with us mentally, visually, but also to be able to physically shake the vehicle using some kind of perhaps electromagnetic energy to get one of the contact activists to stop her vehicle. So this gives you a sense of some of the work that we did in the early days of the contact network, this Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative.
Now, just out of curiosity, that Pensacola sighting that you guys had with Dr. Stephen Greer, the one with the 3 craft. Now, didn't that initiate an event for Dr. Greer and how he got involved with some of the government insiders?
Yes. This is explained by Dr. Greer in his several books and his many lectures. But there's also a part of the story that he shared with his confidence, people in the network, that he doesn't talk about so much. And In order to understand what happened and the significance of his Pensacola March 1992 encounter, which, as I mentioned, there were 40 people out in the field. They interacted with not one, not two, but at least three, possibly four typical Gulf Breeze. And the Gulf Breeze was the name of the seaside town where there had been an ongoing wave of UFO sightings. And this location was 20, 30 miles or so from the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And as I said, it was interactive, it was videotaped. It was on the basis of that videotape that after I met Dr. Greer in June of 1992, and I saw this videotape where he's clearly signaling at the UFOs and they're signaling back at him with multiple witnesses present. That piece of documentation was very convincing to me that something quite important was going on. And so on the basis of seeing that, I volunteered to join the network. But I wasn't the only person that was watching Stephen Greer. The United States intelligence services have a long history of interacting with UFO investigators. This is the subject of a very important book written by Grant Cameron, who has been on your show, and that's an excellent interview. I recommend all listeners to UFONN go back into the archives and listen to Grant Cameron's interview, author of Managing Magic. And he's described how this has been a kind of ongoing project for the last, well, 50, 60 years of government insiders interacting with UFO investigators to leak important information. And so as part of that ongoing project, people in the intelligence services were watching the UFO community. And so when Stephen Greer formed CSETI in 1990, there were important people who had him on their radar scope. In 1991, and this has never been reported, Dr. Greer doesn't talk about it much, but he did talk about it with two of his closest associates. 1992, I joined CSETI. His assistant, Sherry Adamiak, who was helped Dr. Greer formulate the contact protocols and was a very important force in the early days of our network. Sherry joined in 1991, but there was also people from within the intelligence community that knew about Stephen Greer, because in 1991, as part of his initial investigation, he had facilitated an encounter with a UFO that was in the North Carolina area where he lived, and that was picked up on radar of the local airport. So I suspect people within the intelligence community that are monitoring the UFO phenomena, and they are definitely monitoring contactees, and later on we can talk about some of the problems our contact team had with surveillance, intelligence operatives, but that's, again, another long story. Well, these intelligence operatives were observing the UFO community, and in 1991, a very important person, Commander Will Miller, who was a naval intelligence officer, and had a connection to the Joint Chiefs of Staff as one of the briefers at the Joint Chiefs of Staff. According to Dr. Greer, this officer in full uniform showed up at his home in North Carolina and said to him, "We want to help you." We, meaning the intelligence community. We believe that you, or I think I should correct myself, as Dr. Greer related to me and Sherry and to Wayne Peterson, the other working group coordinator. He also has passed away along with Sherry. Dr. Greer told all of his closest confidants that Commander Will Miller showed up in full uniform at his home and said, "We want to help you because Will Miller stated that you were put on Earth by God to open up our planet to contact with extraterrestrials." Well, this is quite a remarkable statement. I wasn't there. Dr. Greer was there. And in view of the importance of Will Miller's playing liaison between Dr. Greer and high-level per people, researchers, scientists, as well as military officers. That connection was facilitated as early as 1991 with Will Miller meeting Dr. Greer. But Will Miller was not the only person. There was also another Navy retired officer. His name was John Peterson, and he was head of, and still is, of a Washington think tank called the Arlington Institute. And this futurist think tank.
Just to jump in here, Dr. Burkes, that Peterson fellow is the same person who played some role in facilitating Greer's meeting with James Woolsey, is he not?
That is exactly correct. And thank you for bringing that up, moving it along, because Dr. Greer did meet with James Woolsey, head of the CIA, Clinton's first CIA director, in December of 1993. And that was facilitated by John Peterson, who was a former Navy aviator. And I have to tell you that it was quite interesting to meet people like Will Miller and also John Peterson, because to be a Navy pilot, you have to take off, an aircraft carrier moving at 60 miles an hour into a wind, and they don't call themselves pilots because that's such a highly skilled job. They use a different term to designate them. Navy aviators, they call them. Yeah, I'm not a pilot, I'm an aviator. And John Peterson had served in the Gulf of Tonkin, and when he retired from the military, he formed this think tank, but he was a rising star in the Pentagon, and rumor had it that he was on the short list to be an assistant undersecretary of the Navy at one point. And his friend, James Woolsey, who was the first director of the CIA. So John Peterson. John Peterson started attending some of Dr. Greer's conferences, and finally he introduced himself as someone who could be helpful to Dr. Greer. And Dr. Greer said, well, who do you know and how could it be helpful? And he said, how would you like to meet the head of the CIA? So this meeting did occur. It was the cover story was that it was a dinner party, and Dr. Greer and his wife, and Dr. Woolsey and his wife, and John Peterson, they separated from the main party, and for 2 hours, if Dr. Greer's testimony is accurate, Dr. Greer discussed with the head of the CIA and Wayne Peterson, and Dr. Woolsey's wife was also a high-ranking person, I think, the National Institute of Science. She was, I think, the operations officer. She was also a PhD and a scientist. So they had a 2-hour discussion of the UFO phenomena in which Dr. Greer laid out his program to engage the phenomena proactively by forming contact teams, and in the process of having these interactions to alert the larger society that UFOs are real, they're really important, and we can establish a cooperative relationship. So there was a series of meetings that were facilitated by John Peterson, who was head of the Arlington Institute, a former Navy aviator, Will Miller, intelligence officer who had a job at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they were working with Dr. Greer to meet other important people and share information about the secret programs that were going on. So I got a chance to meet John Peterson in 1993 as the negotiations were going on to set up the meeting, and it was sort of strange because it was culture clash. People in the military-industrial complex interacting with people who were kind of like New Age, spiritual, into meditation and UFOs. But that liaison was there, and Dr. Greer, in my judgment, is different from the other people that have played similar roles, and I refer now to Grant Cameron's work Managing Magic, in which he describes how Bill Moore, who was a UFO investigator, was taken into some of these programs and reported on it. And also we have now Tom DeLonge, who has military advisors, I should say advisors from the Military Industrial Intelligence Complex with his To the Stars project. But what was different about Dr. Greer, in my opinion, was that the Military Industrial Intelligence Complex, those groups that were wanting to have more openness on this subject, were working with someone like Dr. Greer, who was a high-level contactee, and in my opinion had direct telepathic communication with the phenomena.
Again, just to follow up with a small point about that, there's been some back and forth between Greer and Woolsey about what the nature of the meeting was. Basically, Woolsey has written a letter saying that, well, I wasn't exactly briefed. I was just being polite at a dinner party where Greer basically bent his ear a bit about UFOs. And Greer's claim that this was a proper briefing and all that is an exaggeration, a misrepresentation. And I do note that Woolsey provided a letter that was signed by Woolsey's wife, the lady that you mentioned, who did the work with the Science Foundation, if I recall you saying. And it was also signed by Peterson and his wife as well. And I was wondering if you've got any sort of feedback or response to that.
Yeah, sure. I have to say that I was there during the planning of those meetings. I didn't know that Dr. Greer was going to meet with the CIA director, but the network was alerted that there was going to be a very high-level meeting that was going on. And I think it's important to point out, as Grant Cameron has in discussing the Dr. Greer CIA Director Woolsey connection, that anytime any UFO investigator under any circumstance gets to talk about UFOs with the CIA director, this is very important. So the idea that there was just a dinner party, then this wasn't a meeting that was set up for Dr. Greer to have a substantial meeting with the CIA director is just a cover story.
So, so basically, just again, sorry to interrupt, but you're saying that you were there personally when Peterson was in the room discussing this is what the nature of the meeting is going to be about.
No, I was not.
Oh, you were not. Okay, okay.
I got to see later subsequently the telegram that was used to set up the meeting. I got to hear about the discussions of Dr. Greer going and meeting a very important person, which turned out to be the CIA director. And subsequently, the CIA started cooperating because I saw file upon file upon file of documents that were released by the CIA to Dr. Greer that were coming as part of the effort and liaison between him and the CIA director. So this was, and Dr. Greer was talking about Dan Smith, and for people who follow Grant Cameron's work, Dan Smith is, and also Dr. Ron Pandolfi, who's a high-ranking CIA official. Dr. Greer was talking about Ron Pandolfi said this, and Dan Smith said that, and these high-ranking intelligence officers were clearly interacting with Dr. Greer, and the subsequent meeting that happened in December, I think it was the 16th of 1993, was not a simple dinner party invitation. This was something that was planned, prepared for, and I got to see the records of the CIA that had been passed along to Dr. Greer, boxes upon boxes of documents. So the liaison was clearly going on for several years. But Woolsey was unfortunately fired by Clinton, and Dr. Greer, in a disciplined and I think responsible manner, did not refer to that meeting that they had for several years. He kept confidentiality, but he did start talking about that meeting that had occurred, and of course Woolsey then became very upset because his cover had been blown, and so the story of dinner party was promoted and circulated, and I don't believe it. I think it was a cover story.
Okay, real quick. Yeah, I could probably find out just by looking it up really quick. But Clinton was, by all accounts, pro UFO. Woolsey seems at least open to. I know Peterson was. Stephen Greer is not the only UFO researcher that Peterson was in contact with. There were some others as well. So obviously, Peterson is very much pro UFO. But
I got to meet.
Do you know why Woolsey was fired, basically?
Well, it had to do with a espionage case where a CIA officer, I'm not sure if it was his name was Hansen, but a CIA officer was going into the archives and removing documents and walking them over to the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. Okay. And the security arrangements were so lax at the CIA, and the polygraph testing that was done to prevent this type of thing was so incompetent that it became a national scandal how all this information had been released. And so Clinton ordered Woolsey, his CIA director, to carry out an enforcement and to discipline and fire those people who had been so careless in allowing this to occur. The individual, I think it was his name, Hansen, received hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Soviets. He bought himself fancy cars, a fancy house, all of which he explained away on the basis of his wife inherited money. But you'd think the CIA would investigate and inquire why one of their officers suddenly is incredibly wealthy. They didn't even check into that. So Woolsey, loyalty to his department, refused to be the axe man, the hatchet man, and he refused to discipline the officers. And I think it was on the basis of that he was fired. It had nothing to do with UFOs.
I understood. I just wanted to clear that up because it does seem that, we know that Clinton was very interested and Woolsey was at least maybe a little bit interested.
Well, he was very interested because he was working directly with the contact network. Dr. Stephen Greer was head of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial. His interest was personal, I was told, because he had had a sighting. And you have to remember that when dealing with the government, if 10% of the people in the general population has had a sighting, and something like 1% has had a so-called CE-4, where they see an extraterrestrial being, it's an incredible number of people describe these kind of encounters. We're talking about millions of people around the planet. Those individuals are also going to appear in government. So you have a situation where it's rumored that Woolsey had a sighting. Certainly Tom DeLonge has people on his team now in the To the Stars Academy. There's Jim Semivan, who is a high-ranking former CIA official that is reported to have actually had what's called an abduction. Other people on the Tom DeLonge's team have reportedly had sightings and other kind of contact experiences. So there are people in the government, in the CIA, who are experiencers. And the phenomena is ubiquitous. It's omnipresent. So you've got to understand this to realize that people within the government, on a personal basis, are going to be very interested in the phenomena. And I believe Woolsey or someone in his family had also had a sighting.
Got it. Okay.
Now,
so getting back to, you go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead.
Well, so I got a chance to meet John Peterson. And one of the guys on my contact team, Captain Joe Vallejo, who was a pilot for United 747, I heard Peterson and Captain Vallejo talking together when we met at the INS, I think, Institute for New Science. It was a meeting that happened in Colorado, where in October of 1993, and that's where I got a chance to meet John Peterson. And he was, and Dr. Greer were thick as thieves. They were going around together, and it was, clearly people within the intelligence community were associating with the network. And my feelings about these people were, quite mixed, because my background is peace and social justice. And I had been in demonstrations and organized student strikes to try to end the Vietnam War. And our feelings about the CIA were not very positive, because the CIA, being the president's, I almost say personal, because it's not personal, but the CIA was created to give direct advice to the president of the United States in a daily intelligence briefing. The CIA had played a very dark role in the Vietnam War. There was a assassination program called Operation Phoenix, and there were tens of thousands, I think 35,000 civilians primarily were assassinated by CIA. And these were teachers and doctors and government officials and within the National Liberation Front, the so-called Viet Cong. So we were very much disturbed by the Vietnam War back in the 60s and 70s. There were massive demonstrations, and the CIA was played an integral role in carrying out that war that, from our point of view, was senseless and led to the unnecessary deaths of 50,000 Americans and several million Indo-Chinese people. So here Dr. Greer is working with all these intelligence people, military, industrial types. And for me, that was disturbing. He claimed, Dr. Greer claimed, that these were the guys in the white hats. These were people within the control groups. And I prefer that term, control groups, to describe those powerful forces within the establishment that are attempting to keep a lid on the UFO situation. There are sections of the control groups that want more openness on this subject. And Dr. Greer presumably was working with those people within the military-industrial intelligence complex that wanted to open up our society to more contact. As Commander Will Miller reportedly said to Stephen Greer when they met in 1991 in his home. So, but still, there was that culture clash, and eventually I became sufficiently disturbed by his close association with the intelligence community that it was one of the reasons that I left CSETI in 1998. But this is a very complex story. It has to do with the inner politics of the disclosure process, as well as the inner politics of the contact network, and the various ways in which UFO intelligence is attempting to get the word out by working with people like Dr. Greer, high-level contactees, to make change within the control groups. In a certain sense, Dr. Greer is an agent of influence. That's the way I think of him. And one of the theories that I'm promoting is the intelligence counterintelligence paradigm. People ask, how should we study UFOs? Well, for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, which is an important organization that has thousands of civilian volunteer investigators, they say you do it by studying sightings. But after 50 years of studying sightings, what do you really know about the intelligence behind the phenomena? Not very much. You can describe typical characteristics of the objects, their shape, their color, their flight characteristics, which are anomalous, but you really don't know about the intelligence behind the phenomena and beings that are perhaps inside the craft. You can only know that by being an experiencer and directly engaging them. And so the CE-5 initiative was a very powerful tool to investigate the phenomena, and Dr. Greer, as heading that effort, would attract the interest of the intelligence services. Now, I hope that the group that he's working with is promoting his openness for peace. I suspect that that may not be the case, but in any situation, when you're dealing with clandestine operatives, a lot is unknown. But UFO intelligence, in many ways, is approached by the national security apparatus as if it were an enemy intelligence operation. And so you have people in counterintelligence like the Air Force Office of Special Intelligence, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. You have their people infiltrating and interacting with the UFO community. You have the famous Richard Doty and the disaster of the Paul Benowitz case back in the 80s, where a UFO investigator was being manipulated by the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. And if you cannot study the phenomena directly, you study the people who are interacting with the phenomena. And so the intelligence services are, there working alongside the UFO community, trying to find out what's going on. And it's understandable that they would want to work with someone like Dr. Greer, who, in my judgment, has direct communication, at least in the past, had direct telepathic communication with the phenomena. So I suggest that we look at the UFO phenomena not as a scientific investigation, because let's face it, UFO intel controls almost every aspect of the phenomena. They choose where they're going to appear, they choose the time, they choose the individuals who are going to have the contact experience, whether it be a sighting or something, what is called the CE-4, where they go on board craft, the so-called abduction, or CE-3, where they see it. So for us professional scientists to try to engage a phenomena that's controlled by an intelligence that's more powerful, more intelligent than the scientists themselves, I think it's just not realistic. A scientific paradigm may not give you the answers you're looking for. But if you're looking for knowing about the intelligence, you have to interact with it. And who's interacting with it? The experiencers. So the national security state operatives are going to interact with the experiencers community. My opinion is that the UFO intelligence is here to assist us. Their appearance over military bases, nuclear facilities, nuclear weapons storage depots, their interference with tests of nuclear weapons in terms of missile launches, all this indicates to me that UFO intelligence is very interested in the phenomena. They're willing to demonstrate their capability of disabling missiles, both in the United States and the Soviet Union. I interpret that as a message saying we are playing with very dangerous toys. And this is the opinion of Robert Hastings, who's written a very important book, which I think everyone should go out and get. It's called UFOs and Nukes. If you have Amazon Prime, you can watch his videos, UFOs and Nukes, online. If you don't, I recommend that you pay the $2 or $3, whatever, and see that very important video.
It's a good documentary, it is.
An excellent documentary. So we have, as a former peace and social justice activist, as someone who was demonstrating against the war in Vietnam, but before that demonstrating against nuclear testing, as I mentioned earlier in the show, and was part of a worldwide effort to stop the pollution from nuclear testing. The appearance of UFOs over nuclear missile silos, they're interfering with the technology that, from my point of view, is not really a weapon, but more likely should be seen as an instrument of genocide, that I imagine that UFO intelligence is a potential ally for mankind during our evolution into a world civilization, which in my opinion can only have peace unless it's based on social justice. So I imagine that UFO intelligence can play a very progressive role in terms of a historical struggle to unite the planet, sort of like what you saw in the movie and television series Star Trek, where people can end world hunger and establish world peace and have a just world government based on cooperation, and that would attract UFO intelligence. In the case of Star Trek, the so-called ETs. And if humanity evolves to the point where we can give up some of our warlike ways, we could join something, if it exists, we don't know, something like a galactic federation of civilizations, which people who are experiencers believe was real. I can't speak about whether there's a galactic federation or not, but I know that the UFO intelligence, their message is a spiritual one, in many cases emphasizing oneness and unity and cooperation, ending nuclear testing, ending the assault on the environment that is resulting in global warming. These are the messages that experiencers are getting. For me, these are positive, progressive messages, and my hope is that higher levels of contact will occur as we evolve to a world civilization based on cooperation, not on exploitation and war.
Do you have any reason to think that this UFO phenomenon, the intelligence behind it, is a multiple civilization effort? Or I think it's fairly obvious you believe there's at least one. But do you have any reason to think that there is more than one civilization behind it?
You're asking some pretty tough questions.
Well, they're asking you to speculate then, maybe. I'm not sure exactly where you're at on this.
I have to say that the intelligence counterintelligence model that I'm promoting is a different kind of a paradigm. It was first developed, some 22 years ago, and the strength of the intelligence counterintelligence model is that it makes sense as to why the government is so interested in the UFO phenomena. They are approaching UFOs as if it were an enemy intelligence agency. The contactees, however, in my judgment, are working as agents of influence within this intelligence model, working with, shall we say, a higher intelligence agency. This was a term that was coined by Jacques Vallée. So because of my work in the peace and social justice movements, because of our problems that we had faced with infiltration by government agents, agent provocateurs that attempted to take our students' movement and get us all arrested, or doing things that illegal acts is what agent provocateurs do. Because of my concerns about government infiltration into the peace movements, it's not surprising that I would look at the intelligence services with some distrust. And I'm looking to the intelligence behind the phenomena as a potential ally in what I see as a historic struggle to transform the planet and make the civilization, Earth civilization, worthy to engage in whatever civilizations or a civilization is out there. You have to remember that once you establish the illusory nature of the contact mechanisms, and this is what I've done with the virtual experience hypothesis, I've proposed that some, many, most, but not all sightings of UFOs are like those shooting stars. And by the way, field investigators and the contact network are reporting a variety of anomalous shooting stars that do things that shouldn't do, like shooting stars that move in a zigzag pattern, or shooting stars that are incredibly bright during a full moon that can be seen traveling along the horizon or horizontally for many seconds, minutes across. These are not shooting stars. These are anomalous visual displays. And in my judgment, we should not be so self-centered. There are reasons why an intelligence behind the phenomena would like to expose themselves using anomalous visual displays, because they are under attack. Numerous reports have occurred from pilots describing arming their guns, firing at the UFOs in attempts to shoot them down. And one of the it's been speculated that the UFO crash in Roswell occurred when very powerful radar stations were turned on in New Mexico in 1947 as part of the United States nuclear weapons program. So UFOs are under attack. There's a book written called Shoot Them Down. It's likely that some extraterrestrials have been captured and some have even perhaps been dissected by the military. If you follow the very disturbing reports that have been coming out on Gaia from the close associate of Dr. Greer. I'm blocking on his name.
Emery Smith.
Emery Smith, that's right. Emery Smith has described working as a technician in an underground base where non-human, possibly extraterrestrials, are being studied biologically and perhaps being dissected. So if you're an intelligence flying over hostile territory, which would you rather do? Run the risk that your craft is shot down, your crew is killed, perhaps captured, and perhaps even tortured? Or would you rather create an anomalous visual display that looks like a flying saucer, that's a holographic-like technology, so that you can alert people to their presence, to your presence, if you're an ET, without having the risk of being picked up on radar and being shot down? So I think that we should look at these radical notions, virtual experience hypothesis, from the perspective of perhaps an advanced civilization that is physical and doesn't, the right to self-defense is certainly, and the right to live is something that every being in the universe can understand. And I suspect that UFO intelligence, using a wide range of psychic means to interact with us because of their own special needs. So that's why I promote the intelligence counterintelligence paradigm, because I essentially see UFO intelligence as an ally of humanity to assist us during this period of transformation. We will be one planet, one people, or if we continue in our warlike ways, we will be no people on a destroyed planet.
Got it. Well, James, do you have any? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Getting back to some of the discussions before, Grant Cameron discusses the similarities between Dr. Greer and Tom DeLonge, and it's interesting to note that they both almost have two separate messages. Dr. Greer promoting the positive contact and peaceful extraterrestrials, and Tom DeLonge with his cult cargo theory, suggesting that whatever's behind the UFO phenomenon is mysterious and elusive and has been manipulating mankind for so long.
Let's talk about manipulation.
Yeah.
I recently was given the opportunity to interview people who are part of the Free Study. With Preston Dennett, we've written a chapter for Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrials Encounters. They're going to have a book coming out sometime in the next year called Beyond UFOs. And they circulated 3,000 or plus experiencers and got replies describing people's contact experiences. A large number of people claim to have experienced healings. And I got a chance to interview several of the people from the Free Study, and that was the basis of a chapter that Preston Dennett and I wrote and will appear in the book. Well, UFO intelligence, if they're out to manipulate us and hurt us, and why do they carry out what appear to be miraculous-like healings on selected individuals? In terms of the overall thrust of the Free Study, the overwhelming majority of experiencers say it was a positive experience, that it enhanced their sense of spirituality, and they would not trade their contact experience. They would not want it to stop. There is a small number of people, about 10%, who did not have a positive contact experience, and about 4% say it was the worst thing that ever happened to them. So although people are having these encounters and some people are being traumatized, psychologically, and there are physical interactions as well. The majority of people who are having interactions appears to be quite positive. So I would say that the intelligence behind the phenomena is not the kind of evil, demonic, or manipulative force that people like Tom DeLonge are saying it is. However, we could be wrong. And the only way we're going to find out who and what the extraterrestrials are is to go out and meet them, to engage them. And as a contact activist, I haven't been doing much field work recently, but for the 20 years, now in my 7th decade of life, and I'm getting old, and it's kind of hard to stand out all night and the cold and the wind, and you got a backache and arthritis, and get old, you can't do the work as much. But for the 20 or 25 years of contact work that when I was active, we had numerous occasions when these craft were, or holographic projections, if that's what they were, these craft were within a few hundred yards of our position, and no one on our team has ever been abducted or hurt during these encounters. And this included a wave of encounters that involved missing time that swept across the CE-5 network in 1993, where you had people in 3 different cities across the Western United States, in Denver, in Los Angeles, and then in Phoenix. In the course of a month, in 3 different locations, contact activists, contact workers had missing time. And it was very coordinated. It was quite remarkable. And it was an attempt to show us that you can have missing time, but not suffer any ill effects. There was a prominent artist who was a friend of Sherry Adamek, who was part of her contact team, and he, in the December, was right after Thanksgiving in 1993, he received a book that he was asked to review, as many artists are asked, if they're prominent, are asked to review art books. So he got a book, he was reviewing it in his home, and all of a sudden, he lost an hour. That was in Denver. That was number 1. A couple of weeks later, I was with my coworker, Misha. We were driving back from a field investigation. It was the day after Christmas, and as we were driving back through the Highway 62 it's a kind of, in a ravine. The highway goes through this ravine where the rock face of the ravine comes right down to the side of the road. My coworker said that there was a light following us. I turned around, I couldn't see it because the road was serpentine, kept going around curves. He said, "There's a light behind us. We've got to stop." We stopped the vehicle finally, just as we had emerged from the Highway 62 pass, and we see all of a sudden in the sky multiple lights, and it was 5 in the morning. It was dark, and I said, "This is strange. A day after Christmas, what are all these private planes flying around? What does it mean?" And then we saw this red light on the top of a hillside. Now, we had driven past that spot a dozen times, and I had never seen a red light. And the hillside seemed incredibly large compared to what we had experienced driving into the pass in previous investigations. This hillside looked like it was not about 100 feet high or less. It looked like it was 400 feet high. It looked like it was a skyscraper. I mean, it was so tall, this hill, that it went up hundreds and hundreds of feet. And on top of it was a red light. We saw this as we came to a stop, and I signaled at the light because we had our light bazookas with us, and something very strange happened. As the light hit the hillside, instead of reflecting back and seeing the rock face with the boulders and the chaparral, the hillside dissolved as if it was made out of mist. The beam of the light hit the hillside, and instead of seeing the hillside, we saw mist, and it dissolved. Meanwhile, we're on the side of the road, waiting for whatever was behind us to pass, whether it were a car or a UFO or whatever. And all of a sudden, in the distance, over Palm Springs, a very bright light is coming out towards us. And I was thinking, wow, it must be a Learjet. Somebody, commercial flights aren't flying the day after Christmas out of Palm Springs at 5 or 6 in the morning. And this very bright light is coming at us tremendously fast. The next thing I know, Misha is complaining, it's freezing, it's cold. And he says, Joe, roll the window up. Now, Misha never complained of cold. He's from Russia. We'd be running around with heavy winter survival gear, and because of his experience in Russia, he'd be running around with a light jacket. So he never complained of cold. And all of a sudden, I felt there was something wrong. I felt stunned or dazed. Without waiting to find out what was behind us or investigating the light on top of the hillside or the light that was very bright and had just seemed like moments ago was shooting towards us, we got into our car and started driving. And I remember looking to the east, and the sun was starting to rise, and it was very beautiful, pristine desert. And all of a sudden, the sun was high in the sky, and I felt like I had been on Highway 62 forever. We lost about an hour to an hour and a half on a stretch of road that at 60 miles an hour should only take about 10 minutes to cover. But we were still on that Highway 62. We had missing time. That was Los Angeles. That was the second missing time experience in the network. The third occurred a few days later when Wayne Peterson had 7 investigators out in the field with him outside of Phoenix. And it's very cold. They had lit a fire. It's a very remote location. And to stay warm was down into the high 30s. And they were there together talking about the sighting that they had had. And all of a sudden, the fire, which had been very bright and very large, all of a sudden, it was now embers. And they had lost about an hour of time. All of them, 7 people out in the field. They then crossed to their vehicles that were a couple of 100 yards away. And they remember standing around their vehicles, just talking about the sightings and the contact work. And all of a sudden, another missing time event occurred. It was an hour later. So they had double missing time. So think about it. One person in Phoenix, one person in Denver, 2 people, Misha and I, in Los Angeles, and 7 people had not 1 but 2 episodes of missing time. Now this is significant because it was staged, and I have to point out that when Dr. Stephen Greer initiated the CE-5 network, he traveled around the country to many locations giving lectures, attempting to start contact teams. The first team was formed in Denver in 1991. The second team was followed it was August of 1992, my team in Los Angeles. And the third team in December of 1992 was formed in Phoenix. So the intelligence was staging these missing time experiences. Each time more people had the experience, and it followed the organizational development of our network, first starting in Denver, second in Los Angeles, and then the third is Phoenix. So this gives you an example of the tremendous psi capability of the intelligence behind the phenomena and their willingness to, in this kind of subtle, indirect way, establish, in my mind at least, that they know quite a bit about the CE-5 network and are working with us directly.
Now,
that's what some of the high points of our contact work. I have so many more other stories to share. I know we're getting close to the end of our interview. I'm hoping that this information has been informative, and I'm hoping that you guys will invite me back as well, because I've just scratched the superficial aspects. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes. But UFO intelligence staged those interactions with us, we had missing time. Misha reported to me that he had spontaneous recall of an onboard experience several days after our missing time experience in December of 1993. I did not remember anything. I just remember being stunned and losing an hour and a half of time, and then breaking the continuity of my consciousness. But this intelligence is cooperative in terms of the CE-5 network and the work that the Brahma people are doing. It's friendly, it's non-harmful, and in my judgment, it's going to play a very important role in inspiring humanity to save ourselves. I don't think UFO intelligence is our savior. We, the people of Earth, are going to have to stop war and create a world government based on social justice. This is a struggle that's going to unfold over not decades, but perhaps generations or even centuries. But this phenomena has been with us for a very long time. If they were out to destroy us, what's taking it so long? If they're out to invade, UFOs have been described not only by sources from antiquity, we're talking about the great civilizations of Egypt and Rome and Greece, that have described what sound like UFO encounters, but even in the cave paintings in southern France and northern Spain that go back 20, 30,000 years ago, there are cave pictures drawn that appear to show what we would now describe as extraterrestrial beings and extraterrestrial saucer-like craft. So this is an ancient phenomenon. If they're out to hurt us, what's taking so long? I think the more likely explanation is that they have been here for a very long time, observing our civilization as it's developed, and are now showing themselves at a very critical junction when we can either live in peace, in cooperation with ourselves, or we will destroy the planet in a never-ending cycle of war, global catastrophe, and starvation and ruin. So we have a choice. We can be inspired by the UFOs to save ourselves because, let's face it, the amount of energy that is required to either move through dimensions if they are interdimensional, or from other star systems if they're extraterrestrial, that power, the energy to do such amazing feats, if that power was developed in a civilization that was warlike, it seems, in my opinion, more likely than not, that they would have destroyed themselves as we threatened to destroy ourselves so long ago. They would never have gotten out into the stars. They never would have been able to get here unless they were peaceful. And they've passed the test of time. They've been here for tens of thousands of years, and they have not created scenarios like the typical Hollywood movie where the aliens are engaging us. And for me, this is very important. Personally, it's important because during the physicians' anti-nuclear movement back in the 80s, before I got involved with the Contact Network, we would describe what a 1 megaton nuclear bomb could do to a typical city. And we talked to Russian doctors. They gave this information out on Russian television. We went to England. We shared this information about the dangers of the nuclear arms race. And the head of our anti-nuclear movement, a very passionate, articulate physician, her name, Dr. Helen Caldicott, she, by the way, was also responsible for leading the effort in Australia to end nuclear testing in the South Pacific. When she came to the United States and got a teaching position at Harvard, she formed or reactivated, I should say, Physicians for Social Responsibility. And during her presentations, she asked the question, basically, what can you say about a race of beings that have millions of children dying of preventable disease, lack of immunization, starvation, malnutrition? What do you say about a race of beings where tens of millions of children die unnecessarily every single year? And we spend trillions of dollars of our wealth on weaponry, including nuclear weapons that threaten to end our civilization if all the nuclear weapons went off in a cataclysm of warfare. What can you say about a race of beings that is so full of fear and hatred, they are planning to commit genocide against ourselves. And so she said that kind of behavior bespeaks of a profound hatred of ourselves, of our children. And she postulated that if there were a creator, God herself, God itself, it expresses a hatred of God himself, that we, if we are the only source of intelligent life in the universe, and we are perhaps God's greatest creation, that our willingness to engage in behaviors that could threaten to destroy humanity, it bespeaks of a hatred of the creator, God, him, her, itself. So that message resonated very powerfully with me and spurred me to become a contact activist. And when in 1993, I was with Dr. Stephen Greer and 4 other investigators at the base of Popocatépetl volcano, which was a hotbed of UFO activity, still is. And we had a 5-day mission there. On February 1st, at 11 o'clock at 11:50, a large UFO was sighted moving between the volcanoes. It was triangular shaped. Dr. Greer signaled at it. It changed its direction from moving between the volcanoes and came directly towards us. As it approached, Dr. Greer used the signal lantern, yes, the light bazooka, fired away, but not for war, for peace. And the UFO, which was large, triangular, a couple of 100 feet across, it blacked out the stars as it moved silently towards us, signaled back. And as I saw this object coming towards us, all I could think of was, yes, we are not alone in the universe. I thought perhaps that even if we even if we were so foolish as to destroy ourselves in nuclear war and destroy our civilization, the fact that we're not alone in the universe means that whatever the source of that intelligence behind the phenomena, extraterrestrial presumably, that we would not be forgotten, that all the music and the art and the poetry and the highest achievements of our civilization would be preserved. So worse than annihilation is the end of remembrance, the act of remembering. So I said, we're not alone in the universe. If these extraterrestrials can get here, cross the sea of stars, presumably after peaceful development of a very long time, then we too can choose the path of peace and cooperation. And that's why I've been doing this work for the last 25 years. I'm getting kind of old to do field work, but in my writings, I share the information with the Contact Network, which hopefully someday will become a real social movement and will link the presence of UFOs to possible solutions to the fundamental challenges that our civilization is facing. After all, if these extraterrestrials have some access to what's called free energy, we could use the free energy under peaceful conditions, not in our current state, but that the tremendous energy that is used to propel UFOs could be used for desalinization, to make the deserts bloom and feed our growing populations. We could end poverty and have development based on non-polluting technologies. And if the extraterrestrials are engaged in contact as a result of highly cooperative and peaceful developments within their civilizations, they can serve as an example to us of what we can do. Perhaps we too, like in the fantasy Star Trek, can get out into the stars if we choose wisely and choose not to take the nuclear end, the Holocaust that would destroy our civilization and is threatened by the tens of thousands of nuclear weapons that still exist within the nuclear arsenals of, unfortunately, an increasing number of nations. So for me, there's a direct link between the struggle for peace and social justice and global warming to preserve the planet and the UFO phenomena. They won't save us. As Dr. Greer said, UFO, well, he used the word extraterrestrial intelligence. He says they're neither Darth Vader, here to destroy us, or Jesus Christ in a spaceship, here to save us. But I think they can inspire us to save ourselves. And that's why I'm so grateful that fellow contact activists have this UFONN, the UFO Network News News Network to share the perspective of the contact network and the contact, which hopefully someday will become a contact movement. So thank you so much. I believe we have a 2-hour limit. I could go on, of course, for several more hours. But
well, you know what? When obviously we'll see when your book, the book that you and Mr. Dennett are contributing to, when that comes out, that might be a good time to have you back.
Oh, sure, that'd be great. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I do thank you for this opportunity to reach out to your listening audience.
Absolutely. It was nice to get a few things cleared up that there have been a lot of discussion about over the years, especially that Greer-Woolsey meeting. I thought that was a pretty interesting perspective. Definitely cleared a few things up.
Well, you're very welcome.
And see, I think we lost James somewhere along the way. Unfortunately, I didn't see him drop out. So, Dr. Burkes, thank you so very much. You have a great day, and keep listening and keep on writing, because I know you've got a big following, particularly over on Facebook. People love your work over there. So keep that going, and we'll be in touch.
That's right. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye now. And that's our show for this week. We've got Dr. Irena Scott coming up next week, author of UFOs 70. Hang on a second. I've got my copy right here. 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up. So tune in for that one, and you have a great day, everybody.